going to be dealing with a subject that I'm sure many of you have been dealing with over the last few months, and that is the transition to a much more digital workplace. I know that a lot of organisations went through an initial phase of COVID that possibly thought things were back to normal, and now we've been faced with another lockdown, and some of those same issues have emerged again. So I'm joined by a great panel here, actually. If I could introduce David McGrath, he's the CDO for Clubs Australia, Stephanie Chung, the Senior Director of Digital and Technology at CBRE, and Mohan Awashami, who's the General Manager of Technology Enterprise Systems at Tabcorp Holdings. Now, what I find interesting about this panel is that each of them represents a well-established business with legacy systems and processes. And if we can begin by asking each of you to talk about the challenge that the pandemic posed to your workplaces, how prepared you were, and a brief description immediately on how you responded. Stephanie, if I could start with you.
Great, thanks, Lachlan. Thanks for having us to wrap up the day. So, yes, I think for us, it almost surprised everyone how seamlessly we were able to go from being fully in the office to suddenly being fully at home. So it actually proved that the foundations that we had set prior, were a success, which was a real relief, a sigh of relief, particularly for someone in my role. Funnily, the biggest challenge we found was that people's homes weren't necessarily set up. So, even just things that might seem basic, but they weren't, second screens, sufficient internet, sharing across your household were things that actually became a challenge for us to deal with. And then, of course, the sort of work that we're in, we're all about, the relationship and physical interaction. So for us to turn, taking a client through an office building, for example, or a warehouse site, for us to turn that into a virtual scenario were some of the things we really had to rapidly flip.
Thank you. David, to you, you're a very different organisation, member-based organisation, clubs around Australia, some of them very sophisticated, some of them not so sophisticated. How was it for your organisation in dealing with it?
Yeah, hi, Lachlan, and thank you for the invite, and hello to everyone. I guess for our group, we're a representative body of some 2,500 entertainment, hospitality and gaming venues right around Australia and New Zealand. So I think the challenge for us, we had an internal operations that we had to keep our own business going, but we also had the representative operations going across the industry. And I think we held on as long as we possibly could, staying in the office environment. We did everything we possibly could once we knew things were starting to move towards a way where we were going to enter a form of lockdown. I think we were a little fortunate internally that I think I mentioned to you before, I tend to live with a degree of paranoia. I think a lot of us tend to do, especially with risk and cyber and a whole heap of stuff that the way we work. And when I knew that China was having some problems in January, I guess my paranoia said, well, that's supply chain. And so straight away, we ordered enough laptops to try and get us through. We were already in a little bit of a moving towards cloud for documentation and communications and a whole heap of parts, but that got accelerated really quickly. And I think, pretty much by the time we went into lockdown the first time in New South Wales, which was May last year, we were probably a week or two away from pressing the button and being ready and tested. And we just had to go live and basically push everyone back out into home offices and do that first round of testing. The industry as a whole suffered really badly when you've got a hospitality business that effectively is told on one day you have to shut your doors 24 hours later. I think what we became aware of very quickly, apart from the human side of tens of thousands of employees being stood down, was how do you shut down effectively these businesses that had never been decommissioned before in hundreds of years. You've got produce, you've got stock, you've got taps that have got beer and wine and all of these other parts, you've got air conditioning, security systems, all of these things, and they all got switched to a moment of decommission. And so then it's not as easy to ramp that back up again. So a lot of dilemma and a lot of challenge in that. But I think we heard from the last panel as well, they were talking a little bit about change and embracing change. And I think you just have to do your best through it. And I don't think anyone's got it 100% right, but I think the agility and the flexibility that you find in that moment is the things that help set you up.
And more than a lot of other industries, you were impacted by the border closures as well, weren't you? Because you had clubs on one side of the Queensland, New South Wales border, staff on the other. How did you cope? And same down in Victoria, New South Wales. So how was that?
Yeah, it's crazy, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about the data conversation, but when you've got clubs on the New South Wales Victorian border and the New South Wales Queensland border, and you've got differing government situations in both of those two states, in all three states effectively, we would have staff that would live in Victoria and could see their workplace across the river in New South Wales and effectively couldn't go into New South Wales for a period of time, and vice versa. The CEO of Twin Towns, which is one of our biggest clubs right at the north of New South Wales, he lives in Coolangatta, which is effectively across the road, but it's in Queensland. So data was really important for us to create this story that showed that it was okay to have softer borders rather than hard borders. And, politics, again, continues to play a huge part in the COVID piece that we're all dealing with. And that's where data and minimising and really mitigating risk helps us.
Thank you. Mohan, you're a bit similar to the clubs business in that you have a large network of retail outlets all around Australia. I imagine they were tremendously impacted. Tell us your story. You're on mute.
I'm sorry.
No, we can hear you now.
Hi, everyone. So we had to approach it from three angles. One is, of course, the employees, and it's a mix of employees, those who are tech savvy, who used to working from home, and those who are not, particularly, at the retail venues and so on. So on the one hand, we had to cater for how to actually enable employees to work from home, which is all the things I think Stephanie and David have covered in terms of laptops, checking the internet connectivity at home, and the back end of our own systems being ready, including our VPN connectivity, etc. That's one part. The second one is, I think, the retail venues, as you mentioned. How do we make sure that we can, as much as possible, digitally enable them? We cannot substitute retail people actually coming to the retail venues to have a different kind of an experience because they are not able to physically come there. But yet, prepare the venues so that they can be prepared to become digital or transact digitally and then offer products digitally rather than the typical way of printed tickets on the hand and so on. So that is the second one. And the third one, I think, is the most important one for us, which is the customers. Because customers are used to, Tabcorp being traditionally a retail-oriented type business, had to really accelerate our omni-channel type experience. We were already on that journey way before the pandemic and all. We were getting to be digital and we were focusing on omni-channel experience. But I think the pandemic and this experience actually made us focus on it even more. So we had to actually make sure that our customers were able to be provided the mobile apps on their mobile phones and the omni-channel experience. So we approached it from three angles to make sure that Tabcorp was ready to face the business consequence and the employee experience consequence of the pandemic. But it has been a very good experience because what's going to happen now is that hopefully, fingers crossed, the second part of the journey is when the pandemic settles down, all these three angles I spoke about have to be we have to have another strategy. Employees coming back because they have never used the IT equipment. All the IT equipment is more than 2 years old. They're used to a certain way of working. Now we have to almost retrain them. We need to make sure that the IT equipment is refreshed. And there are people who still think that it's much better to have virtual meetings at home than come to the office. So we need to change that whole mindset. And customers would have got used to the omni-channel convenience. So we still, I think Tabcorp is still committed to retail experience because that's a different kind of an experience altogether. It's more fun than just playing a game or whatever. So I think we are preparing ourselves for the next phase, which is what happens after the pandemic, so that we don't lose the benefits of what we have done digitally, but at the same time, the experience of customers and experience of employees being social and mingling with each other are still not lost.
Now, I understand that two of your major contact centres went down, or people had to vacate as a result of the pandemic and go and work from home. How did that go?
It's very interesting. About 3 weeks or so ago, when New South Wales was at the peak of the COVID exposure, one of our contact centres actually had a COVID case exposure. So you had no option but to close it. And of course, we can't close, particularly a contact center on a Saturday where most of and then there's still a lot of our customers, including VIP customers, reach out to the contact centers to place bets, etc. And we had 2 or 3 aspects to this problem. One is this is a business, and the contact centers and the employees are so used to doing things physically on site using desktops. They never had to go and work from home. The work from home concept was pretty new. And also, some of the terminals associated with that is regulated. Like you deal with people's money on betting, so it is a regulatory thing. And the third one is when we did the budgeting and estimates for laptops, we never thought there's going to be hundreds of contact center employees who are going to need laptops and work from home. So on that weekend, we actually, like I said, we tried to address the challenge on all the 3 fronts. Of course, we had to shut this down. There is no option. We came up with a list of, in order of priority and customers who are all the first line of contact center staff who need to be addressed, and then prioritize them over the next few days. And then we had, without naming names, our normal supplier of laptops couldn't care for suddenly on a weekend 220 laptops to be supplied like that. So we had to go and be innovative, and I had to give credit to all my team members who everybody came up with a bright idea, and eventually we managed to get 200 plus laptops from a vendor, and that it had to be in Sydney because no point in getting it to Melbourne or Brisbane, wherever travel is not going to be possible. And then the third challenge was who was going to do the build, because the images on these laptops are not stock standard because of the contact center, the applications they were going to use are all different. So we need to somehow, on an express basis, get permission, get them onto a particular site in Sydney, get it all built. It was like an assembly line built all of a sudden over one afternoon on Saturday. And anyway, we did that. And then we went to an emergency endorsement from the regulatory authorities about what we are doing and how we are protecting all the protections we need to have. Absolutely fabulous experience. And I think logistics was also a problem because the local government areas of New South Wales, some of the people who could have come and helped us with the build could not come because they were living in LGAs, and some of the equipment could not be delivered there because people were living in LGAs. So it was fantastic. People pitched in. I know son of one of our senior executives actually said, "I will come and drop these things," and he did, which is fabulous. So we did all kinds of. I think necessity is the mother of innovation, as you say. People come up with all kinds of great ideas, and finally we did. We managed to get all these laptops to. So the contact center is now capable of operating from home. We don't physically need it, and races are going on. As I said, this may become the norm later. We don't know, but it was a fantastic experience for all of us.
Excellent. That's a great story. Now, Stephanie, can I turn to you? When we were talking earlier, I was interested. Your comment was essentially that a lot of the technologies that you already had, but people weren't using them, and that a lot of your work has really been in change management. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I mean, that's been in a whole gamut of things, anything from us moving into Microsoft Teams, for example, to giving the ability to do virtual tours and online auctions and so on. So I think that's why it was quite fortunate for us. We had the tech there. It's just been about, the case for change, really. And that's why I guess I commented, a lot of my role has been about, the change management piece, really focusing in more about, the benefits to the business and to the individual, person who's utilizing the tech, rather than, the system training itself, because we're an organization that's been around for a very long time. We turned, 115 years old this week. We've been very successful doing what we've been doing for, sort of almost the same way for a very long period of time. So, last year meant that there was a significant shift to be able to, start utilizing what was already there, but to really start it's a behavior mindset piece as well, that we've really had to focus in on, because when you're trying to shift from, what we've always done, if it ain't broke, why fix it? That's why, my role's really been about the change management side, rather than that delivery side.
I mean, I imagine it would have been quite a cultural journey that the organisation's on, because real estate is relationship driven, but real estate people are naturally competitive against each other, and yet they were forced into a situation where they all had to collaborate using digital tools. That must have been interesting.
Yeah, and it's, to be honest, an ongoing, without using that, word, but ongoing journey for us. It accelerated a lot in the last year, definitely, but we're still working that through. You're right. We're about, an agent's information is the agent's information. So to suddenly be in a situation where you're saying, well, actually, there's this central system and we want to capture all your data, and these are the benefits of doing so, that's a huge mindset shift for us. So, we've recognized that it's one thing to build the product and the technology piece. And the irony is, I often say, even as a technologist, that's the easy part, to actually get people, changing the way that they operate and, getting to a point where they're comfortable with that as well. It takes a lot of that hand holding. We got to a point of very individualized, change plans as well for leaders and for teams to start shifting, how we organize ourselves and, how we go about our day-to-day jobs.
David, I understand your role is a comparatively new one within your organisation. The idea of that there should be a technologist driving your organisation is comparatively new. And I understand you brought in a couple of initiatives from a new cloud-based CRM and a new studio for broadcasting. Can you tell how that went?
Yeah, time goes fast. I mean, I feel it's new. It's 4 years, and a little bit like Stephanie. I mean, I think you were saying you're 115 years. We were 100 years last year, and we didn't even get to celebrate it, so we felt a bit bummed. That said, I had a birthday recently that had a 0 at the end of it, and I didn't get to celebrate that. So I'm going to take the approach of the Japanese Olympics, and I'm going to be 2020 next year, and I'm just going to defer a year on my birthday. And I think there's been some really good points that have been brought up about, similarities that we've seen across all of our businesses. I think one of them, in the role that I stepped into, we never had technology as a service in our group before. We stood for workplace relations, industrial relations, public affairs advocacy, working with regulators. We work pretty closely with Tabcorp because we have Tabcorp kiosks and retail outlets in pretty much all of our venues as well. But technology was determined as being, a pathway to better. And so the business, led by the board, said we needed to have this capability to be able to not only make our own operations more effective, but to provide guidance and thought leadership and all of this strategic direction to the industry as a whole. And again, like Stephanie was saying, I've got a number of thousand groups that work with us, but they don't have to listen to us. And so then influence is the same, a little bit like all the different real estate agents and the way they all come together with the data aggregation. I think the piece that was valuable for us is that we needed to have this data conversation with all of our venues very, very quickly to get them to put together their intelligence so we could form a unified approach about, in this instance, what COVID was doing and affecting to the entire industry. And I think, last year when they were looking at JobKeeper, I think our industry was, a second wave of having JobKeeper deployed to it. And the data allowed us, at a collective view, to be able to say tens of thousands of people are suffering here. The venues themselves and the organisations are suffering, and we could put a dollar number against it. And then we could go to government and we could say, hey, not all regions are the same, and this is an industry that's under distress. And so we managed to get elevated into one of the early JobKeeper environments. And we also then push the idea that, I know all of New South Wales at the moment's into lockdown and Victoria's the same, but, when we had COVID just in Greater Sydney, I mean, the issue there is you've got places outside of that were 400 or 500 kilometres away from the nearest COVID case that were being subjected to the same shutdown as the metropolitan areas that were being subjected to. So again, the data around the health, the data around the geolocation areas and all of those parts around this central data conversation has been really valuable. And I think from what we're saying before is that this is the type of way of working going forwards that we don't really want to lose. And this is the opportunity in COVID, is the collaboration and the deeper intelligence and the ability for all of us to help an industry or a broad group of businesses to actually come out of this more effectively. To your question before, and I'll be really brief on it, I think one of the big changes that we did is we use CRM. We have a call centre ourselves, and that's a localised call centre. If we hadn't have been on that CRM journey and we hadn't have had that cloud-based understanding of customers at the other end. So we knew the phone numbers when they dialed in, we knew the email addresses, we could track the ability to contact our clients effectively. I think we would have been in a lot of trouble. And again, for us, when we deployed the call center, and admittedly, we certainly haven't got the same regulatory issues that Tabcorp have got. It allowed us to just basically take a laptop, make sure there's connectivity, send someone with a Jabra headset, use their MFA to log in, and they were ready to go. And I think that's been a blessing for us. And it's so funny to look back now. We never worked like that 2 years ago. And now if you ask someone, could you imagine where we'd come from in that time? They just think this is the way we did it. And so I don't think we're ever going to go back with some of this stuff.
Yeah. And I was also interested in, Steffi talked about change management, and you must have had to have done quite a lot of that as well. And you told me that it was almost a deliberate approach, that first movers and then the rest, and you got to them later as the message got out. Is that how you did it?
Yeah, exactly. And, I wear a chief digital officer hat. And I know the previous session we're talking about, CIO versus CTO versus CDO with data versus CDO with digital. And yes, there's lots of chief titles in there. I think what happened to me and what I needed to step into was almost chief business case builder. And so I worked in this translation layer about working with board and working with our CEO to basically say, hey, this is a journey and this is why it makes sense, doing it really, really quickly, and then working with the industry. And as you alluded to before, when you talk to a big group of differing technologies and differing understandings of what the future could look like, first movers for me were the easy ones to work with because they were already looking for change and they were up for a conversation of being better. We worked with them, and then you get the FOMOs that come through after that they say, hey, what are these guys doing? I don't want to miss out on that. So the second wave comes through. And I think we're now in this stage of the third wave where we've got two waves of basically acceptance and collaboration. And the third wave is like, wow, if I'm not on board now, I think we're going to miss out. And so we're starting to see that third wave of adoption throughout our industry, and a little bit so much within the business. I think the business is a little bit more evolved because we're small enough and sort of agile enough around that. And we've got one CEO, so it can lead from the top and push the message out. And so that's sort of where we are. And I think that's a pretty healthy place. And I keep thinking about that all the time, whether it's launching vaccination passports or launching mobile identity management or, launching, AI-based, localized data intelligence for regional areas. It's all around who can I get to come on board on this journey first, who's going to follow after that, and then try and tell as many people after that to come on board as a third wave.
Excellent. Stephanie, you used the term when we were talking digital inclusivity, and it seems to be a theme not just for COVID but beyond as your workplace transitions. Can you talk to that theme?
Yeah, it was certainly something that came about when we started to go back into the office. So much like other organisations, we were at 25% capacity and then 50% capacity and so on. And we realised really quickly that we were starting to build a bit of a divide between those who are in the office and those who are still, working from home. So, everyone from home's on their screens, everyone in the office are all in this, socially distanced meeting room on the VC. And, as someone who was working from home, you could miss out of that connectivity that everyone in that office was clearly having. So we very quickly started to have this term of digital inclusivity. Even when you're in the office and you're about to have a meeting, everyone bring your laptops with you, get into, the Zoom, have your cameras on, and just making sure that you still had that experience. So it's something that we still maintain today, of course, because we have different states, different countries, of course, going in and out of lockdown. So that's been really important. And we're still trying to evolve what that thinking, is as we go forwards as well.
Thank you. And Moen, you're a company's really a very historic bricks and mortar business originally. And in your industry, there have been a lot of digital players who've come in. And what you've described to us already is the increasing omni-channel nature of the changes that you've made at Tabcorp. So presumably those sort of changes are going to last beyond COVID. And transformed your business model in that respect. What about the workplace? How's the digital changes transformed the workplace, and will those changes stay?
Yeah, as I said, it's got to be a good balance. And Tabcorp's general culture, a bit like what Stephanie is saying, is that we're basically having a very social company. It goes 5,000 plus employees. The general culture is people mingling, lots of conversation happens, and so on. So we don't want to lose that. And so I think the focus today is on balancing or encouraging work-life balance rather than encouraging working from home or encouraging working from office instead of having that conversation. So on the one hand, Tabcorp does things like, reimbursing any IT costs that you incur, whether buying a keyboard or a chair or whatever. And on the other side, in the office also, as I said, we will be refreshing IT gear and so on, so that the experience remains consistent, but still we would like, we don't want to lose the culture of socializing and having a really vibrant, interactive type. Both not only from the employees, but also between our customers and the retail venues and so on. So I think Tabcorp will definitely try to maintain the balance, and yet all the benefits of the digitization we have done so far are put to best very good use. And in fact, one of the interesting challenges I'm reasonably new to Tabcorp as well, is collaboration. When I started, the concept of, and particularly as you may have seen in the news, Tabcorp has been in the news for a few reasons of late. And there were quite a few times when the CEOs and some of the senior execs had to address all staff, right? All of them are not, cannot assemble in one place like people normally do. So one of the challenges, were we ready to have a 5,000 member Teams conference or whatever tool you use? And actually, for the first few months of my starting at Tabcorp, every time there was a board meeting or every time there was David Attenborough addressing the whole staff, I used to have my heart in my mouth saying, this is going to be a very career limiting move for me. This whole thing is going to come crashing down. But while I say that lightly, I think those things also will have to be thought through as to the not just the virtual meetings, but also collaboration platforms, sharing documents, sharing thoughts, because there are so many things that happen when people come together and thrash out ideas on the whiteboard. That is part and parcel of not only Tabcorp, I think many organizations' culture. So it's just not laptops, it's just not internet and bandwidth, which of course we can provide. It's more about some of the other tools that go with that to make that experience as close to real life as possible. And on the flip side, when they come back to the office, you still get the benefit of the good experience you got with the digital products. So.
Thank you. So Stephanie, just a final question to each you and David. Stephanie, to what extent do you think those digital changes will stay, both to your workplace and to your organisation? Has it transformed you? Will things ever be the same?
No, it won't ever be the same. And even if we kind of thought that we would be able to go back to how it was before, going back, I live in New South Wales, going back into this lockdown just proved that this is just going to be part and parcel of sort of jumping in and out. And I think someone mentioned before around that flexibility piece, Mo, and you talked about that's actually the heart of the conversation. Absolutely, that's what it is for us. So now we're giving people this flexibility and the freedom to decide what is the best way for you to operate and to work. Even just things like travel and so on. For us, we're an organisation that used to travel to have in-person meetings, all those sorts of things. We've already changed our mindset around and never thought we would ever change our mindset on. So, yeah.
Excellent. And David?
Yeah, just a quick one. Sorry, I don't want to take mine's thunder. I was lucky. I saw a ad campaign today, which I think Tabcorp might change its name from Tab to Jab. So you might be in the market around this. I think we're all getting on board with vaccination. So I think Tab might find you might be Jab. I've seen the logo with the same font. It looks. I didn't recognise it to start with. And it's only because we're playing in the vaccination space, because I think the one thing you're finding, all of us want to get reopened and we want to get back to normal. And if vaccination can help us get there, political opinions aside, if it can help us get there, I think that's a good thing for all of us. To your question around digital transformation and change, I think where we're at right now is we're at a position where, transformation went from negotiable to not negotiable. And I think we're on a new way of working. And I don't think it's going to change. What I do hope, and I'm a firm believer of, is that face-to-face contact is still going to be valuable, highly valuable for us to get in a room and to be able to whiteboard and sticky note, whatever we have to do. And I know there's technology that can do that, and I think that's effective if you can't get there. But I still think the face-to-face element of us being in a room together can be as powerful as, well, more powerful than anything that exists digitally at the moment. So that's the future for us. I mean, I think we're going to get through this. We'll get vaccination to a rate. We'll reopen, and we're already starting to have conversations internally now. I mean, we're looking to reopen our business as soon as we can. We are working on our vaccination passport piece, which will be a mobile app, which we'll use for our own staff as well as use for the industry. And, as soon as we can get open, then we get back to normal. But the good thing about it is technology now, I mean, we're off and racing. So I look forward to the next bit.